یونیورسیته کوپن هاگن کشور شاهی دانمارک شاهد یک نمایشگاه بسیار عالی فوق‌العاده از تاریخ هجرت و مهاجرت. طوری که شما می‌دانید کشور ما علیرغم جنگ‌های متمادی سال‌های زیاد از تمام اقشار و اقوام مختلف به مهاجرت کشانده و به کشورهای همسایه، کشور اروپایی و آسیایی و این 5 قاره همه رفتن. در این نمایشگاه خانم‌های غیر مسلمان از خواهران و برادران اهل هنود ما که سالهای متمادی از کشور دور بودند و اینا هجرت کردند در کشورهای آسیایی هند رفتن. اگر شما باید داشته باشین در همین محل ما نمایشگاه داشتیم تحت عنوان کابلی والا، مهاجرینی که سالهای زیاد اضافه از 100 سال در کشور تاریخی و علم پرور هندوستان بودند، اما این مهاجرین علیرغم تمام مشکلاتشان توانستن کلتور، فرهنگ و هنر خود از اجداد خود به ارث نگاه کنه. این کلتور و فرهنگ غنامندی در کشور میزبان خود داشته. در هر کشوری که مهاجرین رفتن و در او کشور میزبان توانستن هنر، فرهنگ، استعداد، علم و دانش خود به اشتراک بگذاره و یا به میراث از او فرهنگ از او کشور بسپاره. این نمایشگاه بسیار زیبا که زحمت کشیده، شخصیت بسیار خوب است که شما امرشان معرفی هستین، مسکا جان نجیب است. مسکا جان نجیب تمام وقت خود را وقف فرهنگ ها، کلتور ها و خدمت به همه مردم نمودن. یک از ویژگی های این نمایشگاهی است که آنقدر ذهنیت وسیع داره که همه را در بر میگیره. ما در سالهای متمادی افتخارات بحث بزرگی از برادران اهل هنود داشتیم که به فراموشی سپرده شده و در این نمایشگاه شما میتونین بیاین از نزدیک ببینین که این نمایشگاه برای یک مدت طولانی در شهر زیبای کوپن هاگن، یونیورسیته کوپن هاگن است، در تعمیر کتابخانه که شما میتونین بیاین از نزدیک تماشا کنین. در قدم نخست من مسکا جان نجیب در کشور شاهی دانمارک خوش آمدید میگم. خوش آمدید.
تشکر بسیار از امرویتان و خوش شدم که باز شما را قبلا از 5 سال پیش باز بتونستم از طریق عکاس‌های نو ببینمتان.
بله بسیار زیاد تشکر که شما اینقدر تلاش دارین و فکرهای بسیار خوب میکنین. این مفکور از کجا برتان آمد که در مورد خانم‌های اهل هنود پروژه رو تهیه کنین؟
این پروژکت اصلا امرای 3 فاکولتا یا یونیورسیتی های شریک شدم که یکی از یونیورسیتی کوپن هاگن هستند و همچنان یونیورسیتی کمبریج و ساسکس و این یک پروژکت کلان است، اکادمی است و بالای افغانای برادرای سیک و افغان هندوی ما که تقریبا از سال 90 به بعد به اروپا به خارج آمدن، طوری که شما گفتین مهاجر شدن و همچنان به باره یهودای هستند که از بخارا رفتن به شهر وینا هستند. پروژکت به باره بی‌وطنی است از یک نگاه، اما به باره از یام است که چطور به یک مملکت نو شما یک خانه نو، یک امید نو میتونین ساخته.
بسیار عالی. اینو تصویری که شما گرفتین بیشتر در کدام کشور هستن؟
کمپوزیشن از این عکس ها به 2 قسمت در اینجا براتون یعنی نمایشگاه داده شده. قسمت اولش است در باره افغانای سیک هندویی که به شهر لندن هستند و یک سمت به نام ساوت هال هستند که زیادترین دفترها و دکانها و کارهای هر روزه در اونجا انجام میتن و در زندگی هم میکنن. و عکس های بعدی از او به باره یهودای از بخارا هستند و شهر وینا. بسیار
عالی. یعنی تنها از خانمان است که از مردا و زنها هستند؟
از همگی هستند. بله شاید بار قبلی که من کابلی والا پروژکت کرده بودم به هند، اونا زیادتر از پشتونای کابلی والا بودن که در شهر کلکته بودن. اینجا همچنان فوکس سر شهرهای نوی که افغانای سیک و هندو ساختن خانای خدا میکس است. صرف از افغانای زنان نیستن، از یک چندین عکس‌ها از مسلمانای ما هستن که چطور همراهشان مشترکی کار میکنن، مشتریشان هستن، دکانا باز هم یکی دیگه کار میکنن.
شما از برادر اهل سیک یاد کردین جنگ‌های جلال‌آباد یاد بیننده‌های ما هستن. وقتی که در جلال‌آباد جنگ بود، بسیار جنگ شدید بود باز مردم ها یادی که مهاجرت میشد جمعی برادرای سیک ما در امثال داشتن و این در امثال برای مردم مونده بود، یعنی همه مردم میرفتن در امثال، اونا ازشون حفظ مراقبت میکرد، نان میدادن، دیگه میدادن، یعنی احساس خود وطن دوستی و مردم دوستی ما در این مردم بسیار زیاد است و افتخارشون هم است که به نام وطن مشترکات دارن.
دقیقاً یعنی منعیس ایدنتیتی خدا، هویت خدا باعث افغان میبینن. به حیث یعنی از افغانستان هستن، هیچ وقت نمیبینن خدا از سیک هایی که قبلا از هندوستان یا بودن تاریخ چشان، اما بسیار حرمت میکنن به افغانستان و راستی افغان های ما هستن. شما شاید یک یا دو عکس میبینین از یک اسکر سیک که با وقت قبلی خودشان کار میکردن و این نشان میده که جامعه ما در وقت هر نوع یعنی ریلیجن هم میتونسته که اکسپت کنه.
یقینا قبل از که مردم ما مسلمان شوه مذهبشان بود و مردم از بسیار قدیم متدین بودن، به همین ترتیب دیان بودن. در مثلا در ولایت لوگر یک جای به نام برکی راجان، اوجه یک راجای زندگی میکرد و همین دریایی که فعلا در اطراف همو شهر موجود است، مردم ترانسپورت استفاده میکنه. خانم میره راجا او را ساخته بود، از پول شخصی خود دریا را ساخته بود. یا مثلا یک جای به نام سجاوند که قبلا به نام سکاوند بود و اینا تاریخ بسیار قبلی داشتن. ما میتونیم ادعا کنیم که اجداد مشترک داشته، ما هم اجداد مشترک داشتیم و این جدا ناشدنی است. آدم باید این تاریخ تنها کشور ما نه بلکه تاریخ تمدن دنیا است که آدم نباید فراموش کنه. و تشکر از شما که اینقدر زنده ساختن. عنوان این نمایشگاه چی عنوان داره؟ تحت کدام نام است؟
نام از این را حتما شما میبینید در اینجا به نام Belonging Flexibly Stack و قبلا طرف یعنی چیزی که بهتون گفتم تیمش سر از است که وقتی که شما به وطن میشین، به یک مملکت نو میرین، چطور میتونین که زندگیتون برجسته‌تر خوبتر بسازین و اگزامپل اردو از این کمیونیتی هم یهودایی که بخارا رفتن و خصوصا هموطنای ما که هندوهای افغان هستن، برادرها و خواهرای افغان و سردارا، یعنی به نهایت سکسسفول بزنس ها دارن، پیشرفت بسیار خوب کردن، سرپای خود ساده شدن و آل بسیار زندگی های خوب دارن به خارج و بسیار کمک میکنن. زیادترین درآمدشالایی که شما میگین از خود درآمدشالای افغانی صرف برای افغانای سیک در لندن ساختن، درگاه تمپل هندوستانی برای هندوهای افغان هستن. پیشرفت یا به عین وقت حفظ کردن کلتور و هویت خود همچنان تانستن به لندن.
شما وقتی که این پروژه رو پیش می بردین، چون موضوع مذهب یک طرف باشه، کلتورشون چطور بود؟ در قسمت عکس گرفتن آزاد بودین یا عکس العملشون مثل دیگه افغانا بود؟
والا ما خوشبختانه بسیار یک چانس خوب داشتم و ایرا شخصا خودم نمیفهمیدم که وقتی که رفتم به عکاسی طرف ما بسیار برخورد خوب کردن. من نیسته که اول خود ما از افغانستان بودم، فرق نبود که از کجای افغانستان، از کدام اتنیسیتی، امی که افغان بودم کافی بود. پس زبانی که ما میتونستیم امرا یکی دیگر گپ بزنیم، دری یا پشتو، یک کنکشن با ما ساخته که یعنی برجسته تر کرد گپ زدن ما را. و در ضمن چیزی که من نمیفهمیدم بود امی که با وقت بابیم ابایم یعنی بسیاری مشکلاتی که دیده بودن، قصه های برم گفتن، قصه های شخصی خدا، خاطرات خدا که راستی از یک نگاه بسیار مرا آرام ساخت، خوش ساخت و حرمتی که برای پدرم داشتن یعنی مرا بسیار آرام تر ساخت.
کدام خاطره یادتون هست که چی گفتن؟
شاید یک مشکلی که برشان بود وقتی که وضع بسیار خراب شدن، میخواستن زیادترینشان براین و یک عکس هست از یک خانم که نشان میده پاسپورت یک فامیله. او وقت پاسپورت گرفتن بسیار مشکل بود، پس حکومت امی تصمیم گرفتن که پروسس ورق و پیپر ورکشان آسانتر بسازن. باز هر فامیل با یک پاسپورت بتونن برن و وقت زنها میتونستن اولادای خود جمع کنن، با یک عکس 4-5 پسر و اولاد بتونن همراه مادر و بابا خود سفر کنن و امی کار رفتن مهاجر بودن برشان آسانتر ساخت.
چقدر عالی. روح عباشات باشه. کارشون و همکارشون قابل افتخار است. ما همونطور که میبینیم که واقعا همین حفظ فرهنگ ها مردم بسیار نزدیک میسازه، با وجودی که جغرافی سیاسی مردم متفرق ساخته، اما مولانا میگه هر کی دورمون از نسل خیش با جوید روزگار وصل خیش. اگر شما وقت داشته باشین کمی در مورد تصویرها هم صحبت کنین، بیننده ما بیشتر ببینن.
بله چرا نمیتونیم رفته. شما شاید یک عکس است که
اول کی از ببخشید که
از یک خانم افغان سیک است که در درمشالا عکسشان گرفته بودیم به وقت یک پروگرام برجسته بودن. ما خصوصا شکلشان بسیار زیبا بود و رقمی که چادر خود پوشیده بودن، پوزخندشان خوش آمد از خود رزوی نمی تیم و پکچر از امی اکزیبیشن شد.
بله و واقعا هم حجاب لباسش فرق نمیکنه، کدام مذهب داره اما معلوم میشه افغانی.
بله دقیقاً. پس میتونیم که
این عکاسی از شما هستیم؟
کل عکس ها از ما گرفته شده. بله
عکس گرفته شده.
تشکر
چون مسکا که ما نمره میتونم
بله یا طوری که من شما را گفتم نام از این عکس است عسکری سیک و این قصه افغانای ماست که در مو وقت کلتور ما چقدر پلورالیستیک بوده. هر کس میتونست که دکتر و عسکر به اجتماعی کار کنن، یک زندگی آرام داشته باشن و این آقا عکس جوانی خود که وقتی که عسکر در افغانستان بودن نشان دادن بر ما و
با افتخار رو حفظ کردن.
بله با عکسشان من تونستم بگیرم.
نامشون چی گفتن؟
نامشون نمیفهمم اما نام عکس ماندیم عسکری سیک.
اما افتخارشون برای وطن است. یک برادر سیک ما افتخار میکنه که در وطن خود خدمت کنه.
بله بالکل. و دلچسب وقت بود که برای افغانای سیک ما یک حکومت یک رول پاس کرده بودن که شاید شما مجبور نبودین که تا دیر باشین، یعنی اگر باید پس برین و فامیلایتون میتونستین پس یعنی میتونستن کار کنن، کار خود پیش ببرن، رای فامیلای خودم باشن در این پیشتر براتون گفتم شاید به سالهای 1990 تقریبا 250,000 افغانای سیک و هندوی ما متاسفانه مهاجر شدن. از 250,000 زیادتر و یعنی 250,000 نفوس بسیار زیاد است که شما بتونین بعد طول بسیار کم وقت اینا برن.
مکمل یک فرهنگ هم را خود برده.
متاسفانه بله و طوری که براتون گفتم این پروژکت نمیسته که فرهنگ خود ما بتونیم حفظ کرده و مردم به خارج بفهمن فرهنگ افغانستان که صرف قصه های ما پوزیتیو هم داره، چیزای یعنی برجسته تر و خوشبختانه چیزای پرمعلومات هم داشته باشه. در ضمن این عکس نام است که یک عکس یک فامیل و این از یک خانم است همراه اولادای خود که گرفته شد دمو وقت متاسفانه 1990 که وضع به افغانستان خراب بود و 250,000 افغانا در ضمن همراه افغانای سیک و برادرای هندوی ما مهاجر شدن. این خانم عکس خود نشان داد که همراه از نمی عکس تانستن که بتانن از افغانستان براین. بله.
و
این کاکا با شاید مثل کنه فروشی وار معلوم میشه اما با یک دکانک خود هستن به شهر لندن رختهایی که یعنی مفروشن از میتونین دیده برای عروس هستک و در ضمن زیادترین مشتریای از اینا مسلمان ها هستن. پس امی ارتباط مسلمان و افغان سیک یعنی زیادترین دکانایی که در اونجا میبینین در قسمت بسیار برجسته است. مردم هم را یکی دیگه دارن و ما خوشم آمد که عکس بگیرم از خاطر که شاید به یاد افغانستان
لباس ها معلوم میشه فرهنگ افغانی است.
و در ضمن بسیار مردم فکر میکنن که عکس ما از افغانستان گرفتیم. این عکس اصلا به لندن است، از افغانستان نیست، اما میتونین دیده که امو نقطه ها و امو چیزایی که به ذهنن و یادشان هستن پس دانستن که در یک مملکت و شهر نو او را بسازن.
بله و پس به کار خدمت بود.
بله.
و مطمئن هستم که بیننده عزیز اگر لندن نزدیک هستن برای نتمی مراحت هم میکنه در نرخ.
بسیار خوب.
بسیار عالی.
این یک شاپینگ سنتر هستن که زیادترین مشتری های مسلمان و افغان ها میرن. قبل که شما اینجا دیدین عکس درون بود و من میخواستم از بیرون نشان بدم امی جامعه افغان های ما که چطور هم را یکی دیگه به خارج دارن من از یعنی کلتور هم حفظ میکنن. مشتری های که همون کلتوری که با وقت افغانستان هم را یکی دیگه پیشرفت داشتن در اینجا هستن.
بسیار عالی.
بله.
یا لندن هست.
کل عکس‌های از اینجا به باره افغان‌های سیک و هندو به لندن هستن. بله.
اونا همچنان.
بله. بله. این یک عکس است که ای از افغان‌های یک دکان قالین فروشی است طبعا که میتونین دیده و مشتریایشان همچنان افغان‌های سیک هستن. طوری که من شما رو گفتم امرای یکی دیگه بسیار پیشرفت میکنن از طریق کار، از طریق بزنس و فروخت بسیاری چیزا و بسیار رفاقت زیاد است. بله کمک رفاقت.
اما که میگه بی وطن شدیم خوب است، بی وطن نیستیم.
بله خوب است. این یک رستوران افغانی است که نانای شاید هندوستانی و سیک است اما زیادتر برای افغانای هندوستانی و سیک و برادرها و خواهرای ما که در اونجا هستن. ما تیر می شدم در قسمت از امو کالونی و شار امو علاقه که اینجا بودن و چند خانما رو دیدم خوش بودن، قصه می کردن، لبخند. پس اونمو فضا رو میخواستم بگیرم.
چقدر جالب است گذشته از که لباسهاشون افغانی است. خود خانه و تعمیر فکر میکنه افغانستان از شما سوژایی رو پیدا کردین که هیچ آدم تصور نمیکنه لندن باشه، میگی کابل است یا افغانستان.
بله من خب متاسفانه خاطراتم بسیار کم است اما شاید سر آدم روحانم تاثیر میکنن امو عکسایی که به ذهن آدم از طفولیت میمانه. پس کوشش کردیم که امو را تا که بتونم از طریق رنگ و هنر و عکاسی خود بتونم امو را پس حفظ کنم.
بله بسیار.
این قسمت باره و در امثالای افغانی گرودواره است که به لندن هستند صرف بر افغانای سیک و ایزیادتر نشان میتن افکورس کلتورشانه و بعد از عبادگاهشانه که اونجا آمدن و بسیار یک کمیونیتی یک برجسته هستن از این نگاه که یک جای هستن میاین اونجا دعا میکنن، کمک میکنن. همیشه مردم از طریق نان و خیرات و اینا و بسیار طرف مرا خوب داشتن که من اجازه دادن من بتونم در امثالایشان عکاسی خود کنم.
بسیار عالی. از طرف خود حکومت لندن برشون آزادی داره، قیودات و مقررات نیست؟
نه و اینمی یک خوبی شاید بسیار نفوس افغانای سیک و هندو از دیگه شهرهای اروپا رفتن در لندن از خاطر که آزادی من حیث مهاجر بودن بسیار اپورتونیتی ها و کارهای خوبتر رو پیشتر میتونستن کردن. یا عکس های در امثال هستن. اینجا یک از هندو تمپل است که از افغانای صرف از افغانای هندوی هستن. اینجا یک بجن که میگن اونجا بودک دعا میکردن و اینا. پس کوشش کردم که
موسیقیم برای عبادت است.
بله.
اما لباس پنجابیش میبینی افغانی بسیار عادی.
بله چیزی که به من دلچسب بود که زیادترین جایا که عکس‌ها را نمایشگاه دادیم چون رنگ‌های بسیار برجسته است و شما میتونین که ببینین رنگ‌های بسیار مقبول و زیبا است. از یک نگاه نشان میده که طوری که من گفتم زندگی و تاریخ ما هم تو برجسته است اما تو رنگ‌های قشنگ داره، قصه های مقبول داره. این قسمت کلش طور که من بر شما گفتم از عبادتگاه هندوهای افغان ما هستند. این قسمت رو کوشش کردم چون دین و مذهبشان برشان حتما بسیار ارزش داره. میخواستم یک ذره قسمت عکاسی رو
اینا شامل کلتورشان هم است.
بله.
و حفظشون برشان چی است؟
اما چیز دلچسب متاسفانه که من نتونستم عکس بگیرم از یک عروسی بود که یک نفر مرا گفت که در صورتی که ما کلتور ما شاید رقمی که ما ازدواج میکنیم فرق داشته باشه، اما بیدهای احمد ولی و احمد ظاهر اینا را هم همچنان نشان میتن. پس نشان میتن که در اونجا در صورتی که تانستن زبان خود مثال زبان هندکو گپ میزنن بتونن حفظ کنن، از یک نگاه فارسی را میخواین حفظ کنن، کلتور افغانی، موزیک و کلتور و رخت پوشیدن و اینا از یک نگاه بسیار دارن.
بله بسیار عالی. چون مذهب مختلف است اما کلتور مشابه است. بله اینا هم این چیز است.
بله یا قسمت هست. بله این قسمت است از یهودای بخارا که رفتیم به شهر وینا. اینا بعد تقریبا سالهای آخر 1969 70 رفتن به شهر وینا.
یهودای افغانستان؟
نه خیر، یهودایی که از بخارا هستند، تاجیکستان و ازبکستان. و
خانه‌شون کجاست؟
این خانه خو است به بخارا. اما این قسمت عکس‌ها زیادترین به باره یهودای هستند که از بخارا آمدن و فعلا به شهر وینا زندگی میکنن. متاسفانه من نتونستم به باره یهودای افغان عکاسی کنم، نتونستم، وقت کم بود، اما تونستم برم به باره، چون شاید یک وقت بود که آسیا و افغانستان کلانتر بود و زبان از این مردم همچنان فارسی و دری هستند. پس امرایشان صحبت کردن با فارسی با ما بسیار دلچسب بود که ما میتونستیم امرای یکی دیگه اجتماعی گپ بزنیم. بله
بسیار جای افتخار است که مسکا جان چیزایی رو پیدا کرده که ما تصور نمی‌کردیم که چیزی وجود داره.
تشکر.
بسیار عالی. و باید ترتیب تا آخر این چیز هستن.
بله کل عکس هایی که بعد از این شما میبینین از
اینا افغان هستن یا؟
نه خیر، اینا کلشان از بخارا هستن، یهودایی که از بخارا هستن و اینا چطور کلتور خدا به شهر وینا تانستن حفظ کنن. از خاطر که یک قسمت شهر وینا در صورت که از یهود هستن، یهودای بخارا از یک نگاه فرق دارن. و شما شاید یک عکس برتان بسیار دلچسب باشه. مثال در اینجا بود یک پروگرامشان بودک از کلان شدن یک دختر، بیت‌های یعنی فارسی زبان در اینجا، دو بیت افغانی نه اما دو بیت‌های فارسی زبان. این عکس که شما میبینین اسپند است. عکسشان در تعجب میکردم وقتی که بزرگهایشان دعا میکردن، گفتم چی شده؟ میره گفتن که ما را اسپند میگیم. پس حین شما که میتونین دیده کلتور، بله اما کلتور است، اما مشترک است. و از یک نگاه ایدنتیتی به نظر ما، هویت ما یعنی حفظ کردن بسیار ضرور است، از خاطر که مملکت هایی که کلشان نزدیک ما هست بسیار میتونین دیده اجتماعی بسیار چیزها هست که به یکی دیگه میخوانه. بله و ما کوشش کردم از طریق عکاسی او را بتونم بچه‌زادتر بسازم. اما طبعی که شما میبینین، طوری که شما میبینین این پروژکت است که من صرف خودم کردیت نمیتونم رفته. تیم و ایدیا معلومدار از 3 یونیورسیتی است که همچنان پروژکت از اونا بود. کار ما بود که را باعث قصه و داستان و بتونم از طریق عکاسی برجسته‌تر بسازم.
بسیار فوق‌العاده است.
تشکر.
شما قدر کار بزرگ کردین. بسیاری دوستا همه دوستتان داره. یک دخترک از سرپل ولایت سرپل نوشته کردن که مسکا جان الگوی از زندگیم است. چطور اونا میتونن که شما رو پیدا کنن در این صفحات اجتماعی؟ در آدرس صفحه دارین یا چگونه میتونه که اونا با شما چی کنن، یا مثلا این پروژه های شما رو بتونن ببینن، تعقیب کنن؟
بله، حتما ما زیادتر وقت اگر کدام پروژکت میکنم کوشش میکنم با بارش از طریق اکانت فیسبوکم یک پیج دارم، در اونجا یعنی با باره پروژکت های خود گپ بزنم و در ضمن یک دفعه با تویتر فعالیت میکنم. اما زیادتر وقت زیاد با باره کارهای خود گپ نمیزنم، باید شاید بهترتر گپ بزنم. اما بسیار سپاسگزار هستم از خاطر هر بار هر خانه که به هر جای دیدیم مهاجریان بسیار روی خوب کردن، همیشه سپورتم کردن، چی در افغانستان چی به خارج و از او من بسیار سپاسگزار هستم و شکرگزار هستم.
بسیار عالی. بر شما موفقیت میخوایم. بیننده عزیز، وقت بسیار قید است، برنامه شروع میشه، ما برنامه بعدی آغاز میکنیم. برای شما و برای مسکا جان موفقیت آرزو میکنم. موفق باشین. بسیار تشکر.
Honored guests and esteemed colleagues, it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to the Royal Library for the opening of this remarkable photo exhibition presented by the Department of Cross-Cultural and Regional Studies. So my name is Trine Brax and I'm the Deputy Head of Department for Research. It's a pleasure to extend a heartfelt welcome to Musca Najib, the talented artist whose vision and creativity have brought this exhibition to life. This is Musca's second photo exhibition organized by Dr. Vera Skviskaya and hosted by our department. The first from Kabul to Kolkata of Belonging, Memory and Identity took place in 2019. Our department has long been devoted to examining and engaging with issues at the heart of today's world. Mobility, migration, belonging, and diasporic formations are for us crucial lenses through which we gain insight into the lives and identities formed across borders and generations. These themes have never been more urgent, nor our commitment to studying them more important. In our work, we seek to challenge perceptions and inspire dialogues across boundaries, both geographical and conceptual. TOUCH, which is a short for the Department of Cross-Cultural and Regional Studies, we have made it a priority to engage with various media in our pursuit of knowledge, as well as in our dissemination of it. Through photography, film, and other visual forms, we open up powerful ways to communicate complex narratives, bridging the academic and the everyday, making our findings accessible and impactful for a broad audience. I believe that this exhibition stands as a prime example of this commitment. Today, we proudly inaugurate Belonging Flexibly, non-Muslim migrants from Muslim Asia. It is a visual output that captures and reflects upon these cross-cultural currents. This exhibition is part of the research project Afterlives of Urban Muslim Asia, which is a collaboration between scholars at the University of Sussex, Cambridge, and Copenhagen. We are grateful to Musca Najib for traveling all the way from Delhi to help us with this endeavor. Enjoy the exhibit, and once more, welcome to Belonging Flexibly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trina, for opening the exhibition in a way, and I also would like to extend our welcome to the representatives of the global or Danish Afghan community who are with us today, and of course also to our students and the members of the faculty. And I will now, just in a few words, introduce the research project that Trina already mentioned, the Afterlives of Urban Muslim Asia, that provided the basis for this exhibition. And then I will also briefly introduce the historical ethnographic background of the communities which are captured in Musca's photography. And I hope to do it very quickly, just not more than 10 minutes. So the project is a collaboration between Professor Magnus Marsden from the University of Sussex, Dr. Paul Anderson, University of Cambridge, and me at the Department of Cross-Cultural and Regional Studies. We are investigating the afterlives of the ethno-religious diversity of Muslim Asia's urban centers. So historically, non-Muslim played a vital role, both economic and political, in the dynamic of the region. And we have focused on 3 different locations. So Professor Marsden focused on Afghanistan, Dr. Paul Anderson on Syria, and I dealt mainly with Soviet and post-Soviet Central Asia in Uzbekistan. So the majority of non-Muslim communities, such as Afghan, Bukharan, and Syrian Jews, Armenian Syrians, Hindu and Sikh Afghans, have immigrated in mass from these regions. And we use the term afterlives to highlight 2 very different dynamics. So firstly, we talk about the cultural legacies of urban centers in the diasporic communities who moved away from these cities. That is to say, legacies of the cities such as Kabul and Herat in Afghanistan, Aleppo in Syria, Bukhara, Samarkand, and Tashkent in Uzbekistan. And instead of focusing or talking about this kind of leitmotif of migrant or immigrant nostalgia that might still be present among the first generation of immigrants, we wanted to investigate the transmission of modes of urban living and skills of coexistence with diversity to these new diasporic locations. And the second aspect, we also research legacies, tangible and intangible heritage, social practices and memories left behind by the immigrated communities in their cities of origin. And here we talk about something that is called the heritage of absence, which can take different forms. So on the one hand, we have these immigrant groups, these different ethno-religious minorities that can be excluded from public representations in their former homelands, and vice versa. Historical and cultural heritage of populations that disappeared over time is celebrated in their former homelands in their absence and becomes a virtual presence or a tourist attraction. So our research team conducted ethnographic fieldwork in the diasporic communities in the cities of New York, London, Vienna, Yerevan, and Jerusalem, and a couple of less significant locations, kind of minor sites of diasporic present from those cities. And in these locations, photography has been important for us, not simply to illustrate our ethnographic findings, but also to organize the wealth of material collected into distinct thematic fields. And Mosca's participation in the projects has been very important, both in her capacity as a project's photographer and also in her role as our tutor in photography, because we learned the skill, the photographic skill from her while doing this research. So in this photographic exhibition, we have mainly focused on the legacies of the former ways of lives in the diasporic locations, London and Vienna, of the migrants from Afghanistan and Central Asia, respectively. And now I would like to shift the focus or perspective and briefly introduce these communities, which you can see on these photographs. So in our research, the Afghan ethno-religious communities are represented by Jews and Hindus. And Hindus is a term used in Afghanistan to refer collectively to Sikhs and Hindus. So the exhibition is focused only on Hindus in London. And also both communities often depicted in the literature as the inward-looking minorities in a Muslim-majority society. They actually played an active role in the social and economic dynamics of Afghanistan, especially in the long-distance trade. But many were also educated at Kabul University and entered government service. In the 1970s, many played an active role in Afghanistan's politics, affiliating themselves to various fractions of the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan. The rise to power of the Mujahideen in 1992 resulted in the properties of many Hindus in Kabul being sold or expropriated. Thousands fled to India before eventually seeking refuge and asylum in Europe and North America. From the 1990s, London became a center of Afghanistan Sikh and Hindi diaspora, and those settled in the country quickly clustered socially in particular neighborhoods, such as Southall in London, and have worked as traders and entrepreneurs, but also educated their children, many of whom became active in the healthcare sector. The few hundred Hindus remaining in Afghanistan left the country after the return to power of Taliban in 2021. So today, the non-Muslim communities should be treated as an important aspect of Afghanistan's dynamic, because they have contributed to, kind of in many layered ways, to Afghanistan multi-ethnic diaspora. From from the trade in commodities of cultural significance to Muslim Afghanis living in London, to teaching the trade to Muslim Afghanis. For example, many Muslim carpet dealers were introduced to this trade by non-Muslim merchants. It is also important to highlight these various relations across religious and ethnic divides and cultural flexibility to counteract one-dimensional stereotypes of Afghan society. So a similar dynamic of cultural flexibility and interconnectedness across confessional divides can be traced among the Bukharan Jewish communities from Central Asia, and that is the second part of our exhibition. So Bukharan Jews are speakers of the Judeo-Tajik or Judeo-Persian dialect. It is believed that they came to the territory of the present-day Uzbekistan and Tajikistan from the great cities of Iran, such as Merv and Shiraz, and from Afghanistan. In the 19th century, Bukharan Jews established themselves as an important middleman minority that go between the Russian colonial powers and Russian colonists and various local Uzbek and Tajik-speaking rulers of Central Asia. That is to say, they occupied a special place as mediators between different political formations. During the Soviet period, Bukharan Jews were fully integrated into Soviet society and state institutions. But when the first opportunity arose to leave the USSR in the late 60s and early 70s, many decided to grab this opportunity and leave for a variety of reasons. So the collapse of the USSR and the fear of ethnic violence resulted in mass immigration to the West and Israel, and have almost emptied Central Asia of their Jewish inhabitants. In this exhibition, images of the Bukharan Jews were taken in the Bukhara diaspora of Vienna. In the city, many Bukharans have settled and still can be found in the historically Jewish district of Leopoldstadt that itself been emptied during the Second World War. So the first generation of immigrant, as is often the case elsewhere, had to rely on the skilled acquired in their homeland, but they also had to do a lot of different low-skilled jobs. They quickly established a whole range of traditional occupations that we also tried to capture in our photography, from small shoe repair workshops to retail trade in vegetables and small cheap commodities. But in the span of the 30-20 years or so, some went into the restaurant and catering businesses, both kosher and non-kosher, and the real estate in Vienna and beyond. And as the community became more prosperous, it has also re-established relations with the Muslims of Central Asia, back home in Uzbekistan, but also in Vienna. So in Uzbekistan, former Muslim neighbors are now working as caretakers of the remaining Bukharan heritage, such as synagogues and, most importantly, cemeteries, and provide a range of ritual services to the remaining Bukharan Jews. In Vienna, Bukharan community facilitate migration of predominantly Tajik-speaking Muslims to Austria, providing employment in the domestic sector and various businesses. So these developments in the multi-ethnic, multi-confessional Central Asian diaspora at the grassroots is complemented by the relations of public diplomacy developed at the official level. So Bukharan diaspora in the West and Israel have become active mediators of Uzbekistan soft power abroad as the promoters of Uzbek culture, music, arts, and economic interest, because Uzbekistan is very interested in promoting labor migration of its citizens. So, and I just would like to wrap up on this note, concluding with one of our key messages or findings that emerge from this research project, that the non-Muslim groups explored in the exhibition possess skills and sensibilities of continuous importance to the countries of their region or the countries of exodus, be it Afghanistan or Uzbekistan. Thank you. And now we will give a word to مسکا Najib, Professor Mehta Sangba, who will talk about issues related more directly to photography. And if you have any questions, you will have an opportunity to pose them after this conversation is over. And also I would like to bring to your attention that some of these things I talked about and part of our research has already been produced in this special issue looking at Syria immigrants, Afghani and Bukharan Jews. So you can have a couple of copies there on the table.
So, welcome everybody. It's great to be here also for me. I am a professor at the Department of Arts and Cultural Studies. We are in this building, whereas Thors, where Vera comes from, is in the other side and of this campus. And it's also, I mean, it's not just because of the distance between the buildings, close, far, whatever. Actually, we on a daily basis, we don't collaborate so much. I come from the field of art history and cultural studies. Although I read lots of text made from anthropologists, it's not so often that we collaborate. So this is really a chance. And another thing which struck me, and which is why I'm really happy to sit here today, is that, you know, my field is photography as art and journalism as well. And and my experience, I've sometimes looked into the methods of visual anthropology, and recently there's a term called multimodality within anthropology, where anthropologists use sound, photographs, etc., etc. But it's if you look at dissertations and books by anthropologists, it's also often very grainy, black and white photographs. They were taken by the researcher themselves, etc. It's actually rarely that they collaborate with a professional photographer like in this project. So in that sense, I think it's really rare, and it's something that other academics and other researchers could learn from your interesting project. So that's really something worth enhancing. And as I understood it, you were actually on board the project from the very beginning, from when they applied for money. This is also an issue within academia, that we have certain, ways when we apply for funding, when we publish, etc. It can sometimes, these systems are pretty conservative in a sense, so it can be difficult to say, okay, we want to bring on an artist, then these funding persons will sit, why is that, bring art into research, why, etc. So much can be done, and I think in that sense your project is really groundbreaking. So let's start because you were contacted because so there's academics using photographs, taking them themselves. On the other hand, it's not at all unusual, and your first project was such a project, that photographers, go into other cultures, depict them, or their own roots in the diaspora, etc. So that was what you came from, but actually the collaboration is new and interesting. So could you tell a little bit about the collaboration?
Absolutely.
Because that must have also been a challenge for you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think everyone can hear me. So good evening or afternoon. It's dark, so I don't know what time of the day it is. But it's a pleasure to have everyone here, and that's a wonderful question you asked, Dr. Mette. I think it is groundbreaking to see academia also evolve and change and bring increasingly these interesting mediums to bring the research to life, not just for those who are in the academic world, but also for a wider audience. And I think visual storytelling is a great medium and platform to do that. I think the sort of the partnership and collaboration happened very organically. Like you mentioned, I did an exhibition 5 years ago here, which was based on another community of migrants. It was my own project, ethnographic based, so I think the blend and the understanding came from that project, or rather the birth of the collaboration came from there, where we looked at how we can bring academic research to life in new genres and new mediums and platforms. And in this context, it was really interesting to have me onboarded at the very inception and not rather towards the end where all the research work was done, because it gave me as an artist also the opportunity to really see how I could visually frame some of the amazing findings and research work that was being done.
Yeah. So how did it work on a daily basis? So you went, for instance, with Vera to Vienna, and so you went into the field, one could say. So she was doing interview. For instance, we see some photographs of in the end of the Vienna section, two men, one in his shop or office or whatever. So I have this idea that Vera is interviewing and you are like photographing, or how is it working?
So The first phase of it was, I think, a lot of information and research that the investigators did passed on to me, so I could read up and also educate myself, because our time frame for documenting these communities were not that long. The photographs that you see on display were done in each of the cities over a period of give and take 7 to 10 days. That's not a long time to really get to know your subjects and to warm up, to get them comfortable, so you could actually document more in-depth stories and visuals. And I think that's where the relationship between the researcher and the subjects that I documented visually was really important. So in case of Vienna, where we documented the Bukharan Jews, two things that really worked was, of course, relying on Dr. Vera's relationships, because she had a lot of interactions, far more than me, with the community. So she had established a bond, and I entrusted her with that to guide me. But in terms of documenting the photographs, it was about my skill sets as a journalist, as a former journalist, it was in the format of documentary storytelling. So less setup, less about, making it picturesque and almost sort of setting it up and making the subjects uncomfortable, but really going behind the lens and the camera and documenting what you see authentically in front of you.
And also, so you went with Vera to Vienna and with Dr. Marcus Marston to London.
Yes.
And we had you showed me the images yesterday, and we talked about the role of, I was curious, first of all, the role of you as a relatively young woman going into these environments, but we also talked about the role of language, in fact. So can you say a little bit more about language as maybe an icebreaker?
Of course. I had some really wonderful experiences in this particular project. One of them was in Vienna. I remember we had entered the home of one of the main sort of presidents of the community, from whom we were getting consent and permission. And although, growing up, I had sort of basic knowledge in Russian, I have totally forgotten it. So here I was sitting in a man's living room, hearing Dr. Vera and him talk in Russian, and I was just trying to take photographs as she was keeping him busy. One of his friends walks in, and suddenly I see the man say in Farsi, in sort of a different dialect and accent, but coffee mikhuri, and I was just shocked. Which he was like, "Would you like to have a coffee?" And I looked at him, and I was like, immediately I responded back saying, "Shuma Farsi metanin gap zada?" Sobat metanin kada, which is, "Do you speak Farsi?" And he looked as bizarrely shocked as me. That's when you start realizing that these borders and boundaries and geographies we've created actually are just humans making things very difficult in the long run, but essentially we're all one and the same, and it's just migratory paths that have gone. And identity really is fluid. And from that context, that really is, in essence, the project is all about. It's about belonging flexibly,
yes,
and how identity can travel with you. It doesn't have to stick to one geography or space, and you don't have to be so stubborn about your roots.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about the title, Belonging Flexibly, because it's about, as I see it, and it's about diversity and diaspora. I guess that's what you want to show, and it's also about how different cultures, people with different cultures, different religions, live side by side, work alongside, and that's kind of a little bit the message of both your project and the research project, I guess. So can you tell a little bit about the doubleness in between belonging and flexibly? So how do they speak together?
So when I was first approached about this project, I've always been interested in terms of documenting themes around belonging, identity, because from a very young age I myself have migrated and been uprooted. So for me, the idea of roots and routes is a subject matter that is very close to my heart. So when I was first approached by this, I had a lot of reluctance, in the sense of how does this work, belonging but flexibly? And the title, I must admit, was something that we came up with later. It was more about the afterlives of these communities who've left their original roots and have gone to adopted homes. And how are they adapting into new spaces, and how are they, evolving and changing, but at the same time creating a new base. And what I found in both these communities I've documented is the interactions they have still within the spaces that they've created. So for example, in South Hall, as Dr. Vera mentioned, where we had the Afghan, Sikh and Hindu communities set up shops. Right across on the other side of the street, you have Afghan bakeries and Afghan restaurants run by Muslim Afghans. And or the shops are, the owners are some Muslims, and or their customers are Muslims. So there's a lot of interaction that you see, and again, identity is fluid there, space is fluid, relationships are fluid. Similarly, you see the same thing in Vienna, where you see some of the Jewish community have actually hired, laborers and caretakers in their restaurants who are Muslims, who speak Dari or Farsi or Uzbeki, and so they are relying on those boundaries and relationships and languages, and they are in some ways bringing it into new spaces and helping them shape and root.
And you also told me that sometimes a person with religion A would rather hire a person with religion B than an atheist, for instance, because people who have a strong commitment to some religion, be it Muslim, be it Hindu, whatever, they have an understanding of what it means to live with religion more, and in that sense that's a fundamental humanistic basis in a sense.
Absolutely, and I think countries like ours in Afghanistan or even Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, these have been over time very secular and rich, culturally rich spaces. So you would see once you go and look at the photos, for example, there is a reference of what I call an askari sardar or Sikh, which is an Afghan Sikh who is a soldier. And you see that in the secular Afghanistan of that time, they had a space in governments, in healthcare systems, in very serious jobs. Religion did not play a primary role. There was harmony between Muslims and non-Muslims, and it was one identity that was being shaped. So religion was secondary from that perspective.
To culture, in a sense, and
culture
community.
was more prominent, absolutely, and language.
And the example you're talking about is the man who is standing holding a little photograph of when he was a soldier.
Absolutely,
which is a very interesting story, and you need to read the text, because when I just see it, I think this is something about memories, nostalgia from the past, the country I fled from, etc. And of course there are these dimensions, but it also has a very specific meaning that he was actually a Sikh, or was he a Sikh?
Sikh, yes.
Soldier in the Afghan army.
Absolutely. So what was really interesting was to actually let him narrate his memory of what he remembers, and hearing him identify this, because there were many photos. I documented another photo of him taking out his notebook, where in there he's had, in Farsi, in Dari, Arabic scripture, basically written notes of his memories or addresses of his friends that are documented there. But it's this particular picture that really resonated, because it has a meaning behind the picture. It's about how proud he was of the fact that he was Afghan Sikh and a soldier, contributing to the society, and the society really openly accepting him.
Yes. And next to that, there is another photograph of a hand holding a family portrait. Why did you take that?
Well, that was an image of a lady in her 80s, and in the 1990s, more than 250,000 Afghan Sikh and Hindu community members in Afghanistan had to flee the country because of the disruption, and as a result of it, because of the emergency, there was a lot of challenges where they could not travel undocumented. So on a very short span of time, the government was able to arrange these emergency passports. So the lady, again, was showing her fragmented family coming together, and those were the pictures of her children, where in one passport the entire family was documented and shipped off or sent off to go to their new home. And it was her memory of the last sort of day before she fled Afghanistan.
Yeah. So that's a very moving story, and at the same time telling a lot about, you know, politics, culture, meetings. Yeah.
Yes, and I think, you know, you would see the edges of the photograph being sort of torn, but for her it kind of brought back. And I remember her saying, no matter where you stay and how comfortable you get, there is something about the smell and air of your own home that will remain with you. It's the fragrance of the country. And I think that was for me a very personal moment. And you know, when then she showed me that day, she described this photograph, telling me what was going through her mind as she was leaving behind that smell, and she was making space in a new home. But I think what's interesting to point out is nostalgia plays an important role amongst the elderly generation. But so is their flexibility, you know, and I think, you know, coming back to the theme of this project, we wanted to shift away, not intentionally, but also to show how resilient we are as humans to move into new spaces and to become more amicable, and the fact that your identity is not lost or forgotten. You can have a very functional life and grow and evolve. And if you see some of the pictures in the sort of the latest sections of the Afghan Sikh community, you'd see that they've created, like, culture aside, physical architectural spaces. They have new gurudwaras, temples, new spaces of culture that they've created to again bring their communities in a new environment together.
Yeah, and although this woman with the small photograph, she talks about her family is spread all over the world maybe. There's another photograph of, I think, 4 generations of men standing in the mosque, where I guess also the message is that generations continue, and you relate to the new culture with the old baggage from the old culture flexibly as you.
And I think that's where physical architecture and cultural spaces really matter as well. The very fact that in London and in UK they are able to actually physically have a building that just belongs to the Afghan Sikh community, where they can, what we call ibadat, where they can actually go and pray and worship. You know, it brings the community together. And so the picture you're talking about is of the different generations who've come there. They are volunteering to take people's shoes as they go to the Gurudwara inside to pray.
Yes. Is there anyone among the audience who would like to ask a question to Masca Najib? Are you curious about any specific aspects, so feel free to ask a question? Yeah?
Yeah, thank you very much for a lovely talk. And
Do you want the microphone?
oh, yeah, I can take mine. Yeah. Yeah. Hi. Thanks for a great presentation and talk, and for the exhibition, which I've had a look at. I was wondering whether you could say a little bit more about the difference in your practice, let's say, engaging with scholars while developing your way of photographing and documenting, as opposed to the journalistic way of doing it, and on the other side, the more artistic way of doing it. I mean, is it stand-up comedians, for example, often say that if you get constraints on what you're supposed to do, it opens up energy because it's channeled in a certain direction. Is that your experience, or is it constraints that created difficulties? So some reflections on this format. I would be curious.
So I would say I probably would compare between journalism and sort of documenting and research, because with I think artistic mediums, you have more space and time as an artist to explore and to probably use with different sort of paper or formats or ways of taking. Here, I didn't pursue that approach because I wanted the subjects to be the focus of the research and remain as authentic to the way I'm documenting them, which is why I sort of leaned more towards a journalistic approach. But I think between those two would be very different. In journalism, you also have breaking stories and breaking news, and you don't get very much time to do setup. But where you do, there is a lot of curation that goes on. Here, I think bringing theory to life, especially on more dense topics, could be probably very difficult. But I think I had some wonderful scholars and mentors who really, for the lack of a better word, demystified all the abstractness in the research and the academia world for me. And I think that simplified my life in terms of documenting it. So I think what is really important in such projects is collaboration as well, where you should have a really good relationship between the researcher, because the researcher is really the bridge between bringing that story to life, and my job as an artist or visual storyteller is to do justice to all the research that is being done. And I think here credit genuinely goes to Dr. Vera and Professor Marsden as well, who and Professor Paul, who have, you know, kind of gave me that context and background, guided and shaped me to then be able to document it, but also gave me the space and flexibility to tell the story the way I wanted to, using my art.
But it made me think of also in the beginning of this talk, I said a lot of positive words about the collaboration between the researchers and you as a photographic artist. But then, for instance, when I see this one, there's no photograph in it. And we had the exhibition here, so I'm just curious to know whether, I mean, in the future, are you going to, or in this, are there coming out more publications from the project where you actually publish together?
Yes, so I think this is one of several publications in the making, because this is a huge project.
Yes.
There is a book coming out, there is a website coming out, there's narratives and stories. So I think what the way, and I think Dr. Vera can answer this, but the very little I understand as well, is that there are different platforms, different mediums, different audiences. So there is, even in this particular research, quite a bit of engagement in terms of the images. So for example, at the end of this year, you'll see a website that will be out, which is more facing for the general public audience, but it has a lot of the research that you see in that, which is purely academic, being translated in a more humane way for the general public, and stories behind the photos. You know, documentations, narratives are being crafted, Q&A sessions between a photo and the perspective of a researcher versus the photographer. So we have actually collaborated quite a bit. It's still a project that is working in stages. So this is the second chapter of the visual side of the piece of this project, but the project is certainly not over. It'll be at the end of this year.
And it sounds like you're not, you know, frightened to collaborate with researchers in the future, maybe?
I just had dinner with Dr. Vera the other day, and I was like, what's our next project? So no, absolutely not. And look, I really think that, like I mentioned at the start of this conversation, more needs to be done between academia and artists, because I think it is a marriage of cohesive blend in the sense that you know, theory and practicality can be really beautifully put together and stitched together. Here, neither one of them lose that balance. Theory can be brought to life through the medium of oral history, or of visual storytelling, or of a film. And I think that's where, you know, as someone as like a visual storyteller, I bring my skill sets to bring that to life, but the depth and the knowledge and the history and the understandings that anthropologists do, and the work that they deep dive and understand, the way they stitch and develop that narrative, is where their professional skill sets also come into play.
Yeah, that's actually almost a very beautiful way to end this conversation. I just wanted to add that, this exhibition was first shown in London at SOAS, which is a department where, London is much more multicultural than Copenhagen is, and you arrived from India a couple of days ago, so you haven't been sitting and watching how people interact with the exhibition so much, and it's also shown in the university and not in the center, but it would really be nice for me to have a lot of Danes actually coming to see the exhibition, because that message of flexibly belonging, that cultures exist alongside differences in religion, I think that's a very beautiful message to actually give to the world, especially nowadays in these terrible times we're living in. So in that sense, I think it's not a utopian message. It's a concrete message actually that we can read from the images and from the research project, who has maybe a slightly different message to Danes, since we are not so multicultural as they are in London, one could say. But we have a question just to yeah.
تقاضای من ایسته که از مسکا جان که در اینجا که افغانان جمع شدن عموما یک تعدادش مثل من آره که به انگلیسی و قدر زیاد وارد نیستن من نمیفهمم. اگر در رابطه با نمایش خود نمایش عکس‌هایی که هست کمی یا با پشتو گپ بزنین یا با دری گپ بزنین خوشحال میشیم.
The translator was Antoine, so the gentleman asked, they said many of us who have come here and given our time may not speak English as well, so if you don't mind just telling us a little bit about the project in the local language. So in the name of culture, I will do that. ببخشید معذرت میخوام که پروگرام به انگلیسی بود، اما ای تیم از این پروژکت است belonging flexibly و قصی افغانای سیک و افغانای هندو هستند که قبلا به 1990 ترک کردن افغانستان، متاسفانه از خاطر جنگ‌هایی که آمدن و بسیاریشان متاسفانه به وطن شدن و چطور اینا هویت و زندگی خود به یک مملکت نو به آرامی و خوشبختانه پس خشت به خشت از یک نگاه درست کردن و در ضمن به باری یهودایی که از بخارا هستند و از پاکستان، اونا به شهر وینا که زندگی میکنن، اونا هم چطور به چی نگاه زندگی و خدا پیش بردن. زیادترینشان به باری یعنی مهاجرت هستند و باری تیم از مستقبل.
موضوع بسیار عالی، مضمون بسیار خوب.
تشکر.
ای که اینا کمتون ما رو در جریان گذاشتین، تشکر از شما.
تشکر بسیار، تشکر.
Can I add one message to the Afghan guests here? If you are living in Denmark and if you understand it, I was just a little, an anecdote or whatever is, I write about ordinary people's photo albums, family photo, private photos, and I often collaborate with the Royal Library. They have a collection of private photos, and they have started collecting, because nowadays people have their private photos on Instagram, Facebook, etc. So now they have started collecting private photos on Instagram. So you cannot just take it, you have to ask specific persons. So now they have collected a small handful of private photo albums from private people, and one of them, they have asked is Samira Nava, who is an Afghan. She's a member of parliament, and she has Afghan parents. She was born in Denmark in Aalborg from Afghani parents, and her story as being Afghan is really important to her. And so if you visit the Royal Library, you can see that her story and her parents' story is a part of the exhibition that they have now permanent in the Royal Library. So I think that's a really nice thing also to recognize her contribution to Danish democracy as well. And I think actually this in another term, this exhibition contributes to, even though the fieldwork is done in Vienna and in London, it also contributes to our understanding of what is democracy, what is culture, what is religion, and gives a positive inspiration for continuing into the future in a world where there are so many wars and religious fights and going on. So I really thank you for that.
Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for everyone's time for being here.
And thank you for coming.
بساط شکر.
Can I just sort of say a couple of concluding words, and also to follow up on Meta, what you mentioned, because it was very important that this kind of visual representation of the communities in question, even though they're kind of far away, it's still an opportunity for us to bring people together here. That is to say, it's also like an event that creates actually face-to-face sociality. And we have observed that in London, the way, it's kind of changed the whole visibility and dynamic, and it contributes to the idea of resilience, just the very understanding that you are visible in one way or another, that you have the public space where you can kind of be together around something that is of interest to people. And I also noticed that my subject, or anthropological subjects in the field, the way they responded to me being there when I came with a photographer, it was a totally different story actually. For me it was exceptionally beneficial because they open up in a way that I haven't seen them before. So it was not just kind of me coming there with my contacts and my knowledge and bringing Moscow authentic pictures. It was coming there and they opening up just because Moscow was there. You see what I mean? Because they also realized that that's a way of producing an archive that might be interesting for perspective, for the future. Because when I come as an anthropologist and then I write these dry anthropological articles full of abstract theories, it's maybe not so relevant to them. Whereas when we have this other dimension, it's sort of a different game. So we were also very happy to have Moscow and the whole idea of having this photography as part of our big research project. So thank you again.
El alma me ayuda.